The first thing to hit is not a knife, but a hand, grabbing Caesar's toga, yanking it from his shoulder in a crowded Senate hall. Caesar, surrounded by men he once called friends, is caught mid-sentence. No one in the room moves. To anyone outside the Curia of Pompey, it's a scene of Republican ritual, senators in white togas, daylight streaming across marble. But inside, almost no one breathes. The hardest part to accept is that every face in the circle has dined with him, smiled at him, owed their status to his victories. In a moment, those very loyalties become the perfect camouflage for betrayal. How did Julius Caesar, a man who extended his hand even to former enemies, find himself stabbed not by strangers but by allies who shaped his government? The question isn't merely why Caesar died, but how a circle of the trusted conspired, maneuvered, and struck in plain sight, using Senate customs, his own habits, and confidence as weapons against him. Julius Caesar, in the last year of his life, was more than a victorious general or dictator. He was the center of Roman politics. He had pardoned Brutus and Cassius, making them powerful, and placed Decimus in command. These men weren't outsiders. They owed everything to Caesar. Yet that bond was also their greatest weapon, the ability to move freely, unsuspected within his circle. For Rome's elite, the Senate was both stage and shield. By 44 BCE, conspiratorial talk was everywhere, but so was Caesar's policy of trust, even for former adversaries. Power hung in the balance. The Republic itself felt stretched. Caesar's confidence in pardon and inclusion created a fabric strong enough to extend, but fragile enough to tear. A single theme binds these final hours, the fatal ambiguity of trust. Caesar fostered it even as it hollowed out his defenses, and the conspirators depended on it to open the Senate's doors. On the morning of the Ides of March, the city stirred quietly. In Caesar's townhouse, omens multiplied. His doctor warned against exertion. Calpurnia pleaded with fear, haunted by nightmares of disaster. He did not dismiss her. For a brief moment, Caesar considered cancelling the Senate session, sending word that he would stay home. It was a fork in the road, and no one realized how narrow the escape could have been. Then, Decimus Brutus arrived. He was trusted, persuasive, on the surface a concerned friend urging duty. In truth, he was the linchpin of the conspiracy chosen for this very moment. Decimus reframed the omens, dismissed superstitions, and convinced Caesar to disregard Calpurnia's pleas. Because he did, the plot moved forward, with Caesar unsuspecting. From the outside, everything looked under control. But for Caesar, leaving home that morning meant stepping out of safety and into a plan designed explicitly for his trust. On the walk to the theater of Pompey, Spurinna the soothsayer appeared in Caesar's path, repeating the famous Ides warning. The omens had come, Spurinna said, but not gone. It felt like any other day until the Senate doors closed. Caesar, as custom demanded, left his bodyguards outside. Inside the Curia, only senators, trusted and tested, remained. The Curia was a rectangular hall of stone and light. Caesar's seat, the curule chair, sat before the rows of benches and the looming statue of Pompey. No part of the setting offered danger until it did. On paper, it was routine. In reality, it was the point of no return. The senators gathered, some carrying daggers expertly hidden beneath the folds of their togas. Tullius Cimber approached first, ostensibly to plead for his brother's recall. Caesar refused. At that moment, Cimber seized Caesar's toga, yanking it down, a flashpoint sown days before. Casca lunged from behind, striking the first blow. Caesar recoiled, trying to cry out. In seconds, more knives were out, each conspirator scrambling to join, some stabbing each other by accident. From outside, the hall remained serene. Inside, the ordinary order vanished, replaced by chaos, benches overturned, shouts and scrambling as the rest of the Senate fled in panic. Caesar, struck 23 to 35 times by the ancient counts, collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. Senatorial feet and marble alike smeared in blood. No ancient account agrees on his last words. Some say silence, others lines never reliably recorded. The famous Et tu, Brute, is a later fiction. There, in death, Caesar gave only blood and shock. The entire attack was over in less than a minute. The assassins stepped away, revealing Caesar's body sprawled amidst a widening pool, the great hall echoing with emptiness and panic. Most senators not in on the plot escaped in terror. Doors burst open as men ran for safety, leaving behind body and bloodied marble. Rome's order, for 1 hour at least, utterly undone. Outside, the assassins raced into the streets wielding still bloody knives, declaring Rome free at last. But there was no cheer, only confusion and locked doors as word of the killing spread. No one realized it yet, but the city was not liberated. It was silenced by fear. The expected triumph evaporated, only uncertainty remained, heavy and immediate. In the aftermath, trust had been reversed. Caesar's circle, Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, had weaponized their history with him. Betrayal was accomplished not by outsiders, but by those he'd promoted and pardoned. Decimus had escorted Caesar to his fate. Brutus and Cassius, once forgiven, now the orchestrators, made legitimacy out of treachery. To the state, the betrayal was total. The Senate's ancient rules, meant to protect its dignity, enabled the attack. By forbidding non-senators, the killers ensured Caesar would be alone, defenseless, except for tradition itself. After the killing, a physician examined Caesar's body. 23 wounds, but only one, a deep stab to the chest, immediately fatal. The rest left him to die by blood loss in mere moments. There was no hint of poison or outside interference, only the knives of supposed friends, operating under the eyes of Rome's oldest institution. Official cause: blood loss, the one fatal wound, death on sight. Wound tallies vary with the source, but the chain of events is never in dispute. In the days to come, the city's reaction turned. Instead of acclaim, there was outrage. Instead of freedom, uncertainty. Caesar's funeral unleashed anger, and the Senate's betrayers became fugitives. Because the web of trust was both shield and trap, the plot could gestate among the closest. Caesar's policy of including former enemies inscribed the circle that closed around him. This was no brute force coup. Every safeguard, friendship, routine, exclusion of guards became a vulnerability. Rules intended for order, twisted by design, delivered him into their hands. The pattern echoes in other collapses of power. Systems that should protect can be repurposed into cages if trust is turned inside out. So, in any alliance, at what moment does trust become fatal? Can a state be guarded if its doors close not against strangers but around its own loyalties? Caesar's fall at the statue's base lingers, one man, undone by those he made powerful, and behind every Senate door since, the shadow of that circle remains.